So now I'm doing the interior of the car, and my carpet's coming today. So once I get that in, I'll be able to test fit the center console, and assuming I have to make some minor adjustment to it, I can and will. And then I'm going to take it along with the door panels and the back seat, like the quarter window trim and all that, those panels, take that to have it upholstered. It's the one thing in the car I'm not doing myself, because I just don't want to buy a sewing machine. So I've got 1/8 inch, what do you even call this? It's sort of a tile panel board. The underside, which you'll see in a minute, is white, and I think probably relatively water resistant. It's a hardboard product, like pegboard, and so pretty durable. I think it'd probably make a good substrate for my door panels. This is the original door panel, and I'm not going to have any holes in it except for where it mounts, and I'm going to put a different armrest on it in the position of my choosing. So after I get the panel made, I'll figure that out, and you'll see how that's going to be attached. I've got it figured out already. But the first thing I have to do is I trace the old door panel onto this. I'm going to cut it out, then I'll flip it over and cut out another one for the other side. They mirror one another, and we'll go from there. The blade I'm using is a pretty fine, it's a metal cutting blade, so like the equivalent of a hacksaw blade, because I don't want to chew this stuff up too bad. This is just a sanding block with some 80 grit on it just to take this fur off. All right, there we go. Now I'll cut the other one. I took the door panel blank and I laid it on a piece of plastic. This is a piece of 2 mil plastic, so it's pretty thin, but if I had 6 mil, I would have used it. It's hard to buy 6 mil. Now that I say that, I see some over in the other side of my garage, but it's hard to buy small quantities of 6 mil. So I bought the 2 mil. The problem with the 2 mil is when you lay the blank on top of it and cut it out, there's no tension on it, so it's a perfect cut. It matches the exact size of the blank. When you tape it up on the door, you're taping it into a recessed area, so you're taping it along the bevel, and the tendency is to stretch it just a tiny bit, so it deforms the plastic. And when I take it off and lay it on the blank, the holes may not be perfect, but we're about to find out. I'm going to take it off, put it on the blank, and transfer all these holes onto the blank for drilling. In addition, I marked these big openings just so I know where they are. I have to be sure to avoid this one for my armrest, the way my armrest is going to mount. And then I've also marked these two bolts right here. These are the bolts that hold in the door popper. They're pretty low profile, but I'm not sure they're low profile enough. So I may have to, I'm going to drill out the back of the door blank to accommodate the thickness of the head. But I think they're thicker than the door blank, so I may have to try to find a different bolt or do something different there. At any rate, I'm going to peel this thing off and transfer all these marks onto the blank and drill them, and we'll see how that looks. So I transferred all the markings on the plastic to the blank for the driver's side and drilled all the holes, kind of sanded them just to get rid of the fuzz. Drilled these 2 holes for the door popper bolts that are holding that in. And then I just put 4 of the fasteners, and let me grab them to show you. So these are made by Hillman. They sell them at Lowe's or Home Depot. Actually, these came from Lowe's, and actually have a little section in their hardware for automotive. And these are described as Ford fasteners, so they're perfect for what this is doing. So I stuck 4 of them in there. They come out easily enough, but anything that I use just for testing purposes, I'll probably just replace with new ones. Those things are 69 cents for a 2-pack. Don't buy them at the automotive store. They're like $3.69 for 2 of them at the automotive store. So it's a rip-off. But at any rate, these things will be installed in this when I bring it to the guy to do the upholstery. And the upholstery goes right over this. These things will be invisible. They'll be behind the leather. And I assume maybe they cut the foam around that and it all just stretches right over it. But at any rate, This is fairly common way from what I understand of doing it. So the next thing I had to do was figure out these. And I had two choices. I could install this way with this part towards the front, or this way with this part towards the back. And I think I'm leaning towards doing it this way, though I'm not quite finished yet. But what I do want is I want it to generally be at the same elevation relative to the seat as the center console. So I stuck the center console in temporarily, got a measurement off the seat to the top of the center console, used the same measurement on this side and marked this. And then I checked it with a straight edge also. I checked that the car is generally level and ran a straight edge across, or not a straight edge, but actually level. Ran the level across here, and it came across to just about the same mark. So I think it's generally in the right location. The other thing I had to be sensitive to is this thing has some thickness to it, like a couple inches, and my seats are just a ½ inch from the door panels. So I don't have a whole lot of room for the seat back to interfere with this. In fact, it won't work. So, but that works okay. You know, I think this is probably about the right location for this. I think it's fairly similar to the location in the original one in the Mustang. And when I slide this seat as far forward as it goes, which would be for someone very short, and keep in mind, I'm probably going to be the only one ever driving this, but my wife's not as tall as me, so she would have to move the seat up, but it won't interfere with this. So that works out fine. So I'm going to take this apart, bring it over to the bench, and figure out the best way to mount this. And I think I'm going to make a back panel that this mounts to, and then it also gets covered in leather, and that back panel sits on here just to give this a little more detail. But I'm going to see how that looks on the bench and then decide. In any case, this will be attached to this panel, but also I'm going to put a 1.5 inch wide L bracket that's going to be mounted on the door behind this, and a leg will come through, and it'll be right in the center of the pull. There'll be a slot that I'll cut in here for that, so when you set the door panel on there, that angle will be into this armrest, and then a small bolt will go through here or up through the bottom that will lock it in place. Just so when you pull on this to close the door, you're not just pulling on this panel, even though it's pretty strong, but you're actually pulling on something that's attached to the steel of the door. So we're going to do all that on the bench and see how it goes. And whenever I get this one ready, I'm going to just confirm that it works on the other side in the reverse, like with the outside facing in. And if it does, I'm just going to duplicate this to make the other one so that they're absolutely symmetrical and identical. So here's the decision on where this thing's going and how I arrived at it. I had already marked generally the center of the pull part of the armrest on the door. So I sort of started with that. And while in the car, I set the thing like that, trying to make the pull level. For no particular reason, it's just how I stuck it on the door in the car. But after I got back over here and looked at it a little bit, I decided this thing really should be at an angle. I think it's more comfortable with your arm naturally at an angle, and a lot of pictures I've seen online from the company that made this, these things are installed at an angle. So I think it kind of looks good this way. So that's what I chose. I had to arbitrarily pick a dimension off the bottom. So I picked 1.5 inches because I'm a carpenter, and an inch and a half is an important number for me. And then I took the center of this and marked it, and I had already determined where this should be in this direction. This marked the elevation and the center line of it while it was in the car. So that for me is 19 3/4 inches from this front edge at an inch and a half up, and then I just did a perpendicular line up just to get it out of the way, and I used that line for the bottom 2 points of this to touch, and then I lined up the armrest this way where this line intersects the center of that. So that looks like it's going to be comfortable, and I'm not sure how much use it gets other than for closing the door, but occasionally I guess my arm will be on it. My arm tends to be up much higher, like I'll put my arm on the door with the window down before I really ever stick it on there unless it were raining or something. But I think for most people this is probably the correct elevation. The original one from 66 was about the same elevation but further back. It was back in here, and that just, there's no way that would have worked for me given my height. Not that I'm a monster or anything. Actually, I'm not sure how that would have worked for anybody, because you'd really have to back the seat up a lot to use it. But I guess it's mostly just for closing the door. So this is how I'm going to do it. I decided not to put a back panel on it. By back panel, I mean sometimes, like if this thing were way up here all by itself, you might take another piece of this board and pick a dimension outside of this. It could be, an inch all the way around. And you cut that thing and then mount this to it, and that whole piece gets leather on it, and then this whole piece gets leather, and then that sits on top of there, so it gives it a little more dimension. But I don't think it needs it. I'm going to leave it up to the guy doing the upholstery. I think we'll probably put a bunch of vertical pleats or whatever you call them in here, and maybe just do some detail around this in the foam and leather, and not add any other pieces to it. Couple things I've learned: these are a one-way street, so don't waste them holding that thing up there in order to mark it, because they come out of the car relatively easy. I mean, I had to use a plastic tool to get them out, but I could not get them out of this. I was afraid I was going to break this, so I just had to clip them off. But that's okay. I mean, they're pretty cheap and pretty easy to get. So, the very last thing I do, actually, I won't even install them. I'll just give them to the upholsterer, and he'll put them in when he's to that stage. They can be sort of a pain in the ass if they're sticking through and you're still doing work on this. So I learned that. This has a flat edge. So it's a 66 Mustang, and this is a straight edge from this corner to somewhere, right near the end, which is helpful if you need to take measurements, or just, using the edge of the material that this was cut from. I didn't have to cut that edge. So that's pretty helpful. This is one continuous curve. Actually, I think just about everything is some amount of curve. So cut it slowly and accurately, because any waves in this, are subject to show up in the finished product. I used a jigsaw to cut it, and a lot of jigsaws today, including mine, has um, an oscillating setting. So instead of the blade just going up and down, it goes up and out and down, and it's an aggressive setting, for cutting. Not for cutting this. Let me put it that way. So this is best cut with a bimetal blade, like you would use for cutting metal, like the equivalent of a hacksaw blade, but a bimetal blade, and with the oscillating feature off, so that you can really follow that line and you get a nice clean edge, and there's not much else to do after you cut it. I drilled my holes in here. I think these are 3/16. It might be 1/4 inch, and it might be something between 3/16 and 1/4 inch, because those little clips are tight in here, tighter in here than they are in the door, but they work perfectly. The 4 of them held this thing on there very, very securely. So my next move is to, I've got these fittings that go in the back of the fiberglass on this thing, and I've got to drill those and then transfer the holes through. Actually, I'll drill these and then transfer those marks into this, install these, and this will get bolted to this through this. And then actually what I'll do is I'll drill these, put this back up on the door, mark where these holes are in the door so that I can drill a hole behind it so that this head doesn't interfere. So I'll just use the step drill bit in the door to drill that out, and then when the panel gets installed, those heads won't be in the way. The other thing I'll do is I'll make a new plastic piece for this. It's basically a rain guard that will go on, and I'm going to use the 6mm plastic for that, which I have, and I'll just make that and glue it, contact cement it around the perimeter and a couple other high spots, and it will just be there. And the inside of a door is exposed to the weather, so it gets rain in it, and you don't want rain on any of this stuff. So to protect the inside of the car, the finish, we put plastic up there, and cars today still have a piece of vapor barrier up there. So the next step you'll see after this is the installation of this, and then once it's all perfect, I'm just going to duplicate it all to the other door, and these will be ready to go to the upholsterer next week. So because of the coronavirus, we're all trapped inside, and one thing I'm doing is getting caught up on a bunch of video, and as far as rendering it and getting it out. And when I got to the footage for the door panels, I realized I never really made the next video. Not just the one that wrapped it up, but the one where I mounted the armrest on the door panel. But it's pretty simple to explain. First thing I did is, if you saw earlier in the video, the armrest has, it's all a fiberglass product. I cut a piece of plywood, I think 3/8 of an inch plywood, that is the exact shape of the back of the armrest, and the manufacturer of the armrest recommended this. So I cut that, attached it to the armrest with glue and maybe a couple screws, and then installed the little screw inserts in the back of it. You drill like a 3/8 inch hole, and those things thread into that, and that gives you it's a threaded insert, so that gives you machine screw threads in order for the bolts that come from through the back of this to attach. So it's all very secure. I mentioned earlier in the video putting an L bracket in this, but you don't need it. The number of attachment points on this thing, This is very strong. You can pull on this all day long to close the door. It's never going to pull off. So, you know, I didn't really do much more after the last video other than mounting this, and then I dismounted it so that this could be covered separately. So, you know, this has material on it, this has material on it, and then the machine screws hold this on, like it got attached after. So all these pleats and everything go right behind this, and it worked out great. The guy that did the upholstery did a great job. I took this whole shape and drew it in CAD, and then messed with a bunch of different designs before I finally came up with this one. So I drew it like this and gave him the drawing, and he made it match the drawing. So it worked out really well. There's not a whole lot to it. It's pretty plain, but that's kind of the theme of the car. You know, I don't have hardly any of the emblems on the outside of the car. I have the Ford emblem and a gas cap and an antenna, but not any other trim. Don't even have side mirrors on the car. So I like this kind of simpler look. Anyway, so that's that one, and now it's time to move on to something else.